In 1921, the German mark was worth roughly 4 to the US dollar. By November 1923, you needed 4.2 trillion marks just to buy $1. Prices were doubling every 4 days. Workers were paid twice a day so they could spend their wages before lunch made them worthless. A wheelbarrow of cash for a loaf of bread. Most people assume Weimar Germany collapsed because of bad monetary policy. It didn't. The monetary collapse was the final stage. The system had been quietly dying for years before anyone called it a collapse.
The Allies, though America objected, presented the German government with a bill for 132 billion gold marks. That's billion with a B. It was twice Germany's annual income. Desperate, facing a bill they didn't have the money to pay, the Germans did just what America's Continental Congress did in 1777. They fired up the printing press and pumped out the paper.
In 1946, Hungary recorded the highest inflation in human history. Prices doubled every 15 hours. In 2001, Argentina froze every bank account in the country overnight. Citizens went to bed with savings and woke up with IOUs.
The problem is that, as we normally say, Argentina is a country that never misses an opportunity to miss an opportunity.
Argentina's economy is so chaotic is because of consistent economic mismanagement over decades.
In 2016, Venezuela's inflation hit 800%. By 2018, it was 130,000%. Supermarket shelves emptied. The currency became worth less than the paper it was printed on.
Undeterred by security forces, participants of Venezuela's resurgent insurrection movement flood the streets of Caracas. It's the first time protesters have demonstrated against Nicolas Maduro's government in months, and they're in it for the long haul. They insist they'll continue protesting until the Venezuelan leader gives up his hold on power.
In 2019, Lebanon's bank simply stopped letting people withdraw their own money. Different countries, different decades, different stated causes, same sequence underneath. Every economic system that has ever collapsed moved through these 3 stages before it broke. Not a sudden explosion, a slow withdrawal of trust, then a withdrawal of effort, then a snap. The people living inside each one called it something else. They called it inflation. They called it political instability. They called it bad luck. They were watching stage 2 or stage 3 by the time they noticed anything was wrong. Every collapsing system starts the same way. Not with a crash, with a promise that the math can no longer support. Pensions built on the assumption of 3 workers for every retiree, when the ratio is now 1.5 to 1. Healthcare systems priced for a population that doesn't age, when the population is aging faster than any point in recorded history. Housing policy designed for a world where wages and prices move together. When wages stopped tracking prices in the late 1970s, it never caught up. These aren't political failures, they're mathematical ones. The promises were made when the numbers worked. The numbers stopped working. The promises stayed on the books. And slowly, people start running the calculation themselves. A 28-year-old in London runs the numbers. The median house costs 13 times the median salary. Student debt takes 15 years to clear. The pension they've been paying into since their first job may or may not exist in the recognizable form by the time they're eligible for it. The math doesn't work, so they stop believing it will. This is the first stage. Not a protest, not a riot, just a quiet, private withdrawal of belief. Millions of individual calculations arriving at the same conclusion at roughly the same time. And that withdrawal of belief automatically triggers the second stage. When enough people stop believing the system will reward them, they stop feeding it. Not with riots, with silence. Japan is the clearest example. After its asset bubble collapsed in the early 1990s, an entire generation quietly recalibrated. Young people stopped buying houses, stopped having children, stopped spending. The Japanese government has run deficit spending for over 30 years, trying to reset an economy whose population simply decided the old deal was no longer worth accepting. In 2023, Japan spent 25% of total tax revenue servicing the interest on its existing debt. Not paying the debt down, just paying the interest to stay in place. The same pattern is now visible across multiple Western economies. The term quiet quitting entered the mainstream vocabulary around 2022, describing workers doing the minimum required and nothing more. In China, a movement called lying flat spread among young men opting out of the career treadmill entirely. In several developed economies, the share of under 25s not in education, employment, or training now exceeds 20%. These aren't cultural phenomena, they're economic signals. South Korea's fertility rate hit 0.72 in 2023, the lowest ever recorded for any country in history. Not 0.72 children per woman in a bad year, 0.72 as the national average. A country that has calculated collectively and individually that the cost of participation in the old social contract, house, family, career, no longer makes sense.
This kind of low fertility rate and extended life expectancy continues. South Korean economy and society disappears in the next 100 years.
Modern economies don't just run on capital, they run on human energy. New businesses, new families, new consumption, new tax revenue. The pension system isn't a savings account sitting somewhere waiting to be collected. It's a pipeline. Current workers fund current retirees. When the pipeline narrows, fewer workers, lower wages, less participation, the math that was already fragile becomes impossible. When a government is spending a quarter of its income just to stay in place, it eventually reaches for the one tool that has no political cost in the short term, the printing press. When the pipeline runs dry, governments move through a predictable sequence. Weimar Germany is the template. In 1921, the German government faced war reparations it could not pay from tax revenue. The solution was to print. At first, the inflation was manageable, uncomfortable, but not catastrophic. Then it accelerated. Then it became self-reinforcing. By mid-1923, the Reichsbank was printing money faster than the presses could run. They hired private printing companies to help. The currency lost all meaning, not over years, but over weeks. The people who survived with their wealth intact were the ones who had converted savings into hard assets, land, foreign currency, physical goods, before the final acceleration. The ones who waited, who trusted that the government would stabilize things, lost everything. First, financial repression. Pension funds and banks get quietly directed, sometimes legally required, to hold government bonds when those bonds are returning less than inflation. Your retirement savings are lending money to a government that is slowly devaluing that same money. The mechanism is invisible to most people because it happens inside institutions they trust. Then, capital controls. Argentina's Corralito in 2001 froze dollar accounts overnight with no warning. Lebanon in 2019 simply closed the withdrawal window. Cyprus in 2013 imposed a levy directly on bank deposits. Each time, the stated reason was financial stability, and each time, the people who planned their lives around those savings had no recourse. Then comes the question the market eventually asks about every heavily indebted government. Can these debts ever actually be paid back? The global debt-to-GDP ratio is currently over 330%. The United States is adding roughly $1 trillion in new debt every 100 days. At some point, the arithmetic becomes undeniable. And when it does, history shows there are only ever two ways out. The first is the hard default. The government acknowledges the math doesn't work. Bonds get restructured, pension funds absorb losses, the banking system resets. Painful and honest. The second is the soft default. Print the money, pay the nominal debt with currency that buys progressively less. Inflation restructures the obligations invisibly so no politician has to stand at a podium and say the promises cannot be kept. Every government in recorded history that has reached this point has chosen the second option. Every single one. Because the first option requires a politician to say out loud that the promises made to their voters were mathematically impossible. The second option lets them say they are managing a complex economic environment. The words are different. The outcome for anyone holding savings denominated in that currency, purchasing power declining, promises worth less each year, is identical. 3 stages, every time. The math behind the promises breaks quietly, years or decades before anyone calls it a crisis. The people powering the system recalibrate and start withdrawing their energy. The debt load accumulates until the only remaining tools are the ones that transfer the cost onto savings holders invisibly. The citizens inside each collapse called it something different. They didn't recognize the sequence before they were living inside one stage at a time, not watching it from the outside. The question worth sitting with, and the one I want you to answer in the comments, is this. Based on what you've seen in your own economy, which stage do you think you're currently in? Stage 1, where the promises are still being made but the math is visibly breaking? Stage 2, where the withdrawal of participation is already underway? Or Stage 3, where the tools being reached for are the ones that work by making the cost invisible? Put your answer below. Tell me which signal made you land there. I read all of them. I'll see you in the next one.